Okay, so quite a few of you were here last week, and we mentioned fascia very briefly then. We're obviously going to go into it in much greater depth today. And a few of you weren't here last time, so if any of you haven't met me before, I'm Thomas, the founder and principal of the college, and I'll be presenting this evening together with Lizette. And so let's dive straight into it. First of all, what is fascia? Would anyone like to define it?
I can try.
Yes, Nicole?
Sure. Is it like the connecting tissue between organs or bones, that kind of thing?
Yeah, absolutely. It's essentially defined, or has been defined for many years, as connective. Well, it is connective tissue, of course. There are many types of connective tissue in the body, and fascia is one type of connective tissue. And as you say, it is something that connects other things like organs, muscles, and such like. But it's actually far more than that. It's not merely connective tissue. It's much more than connective tissue. And I'd like to start by going into a PowerPoint and looking at a few pictures of fascia to give us a clearer idea of what it actually consists of. So there we have an initial picture of fascia, which, as you've mentioned, is a connective tissue, and that makes it look quite like a connective tissue. You can imagine that enveloping various structures in the body. But if we look at it a bit more closely, we can see that fascia is composed of a great many tiny fibers that form that tissue. If we look even more closely, we can see that those are not just fibers, they're actually tubules, microscopic tubules. And we can look even more closely and see that things are passing through those tubules. Those tubules within the fascia, which create the fascia, are able to carry fluids, energy, all sorts of things within that fascial network. So fascia, as I say, is much more than just connective tissue. It is a remarkable and highly significant component of our bodies. Over 150 years ago, Andrew Taylor Still, who you can see there in that picture, the founder of osteopathy, provided many very profound comments on fascia in his book, Philosophy of Osteopathy. I'd like to read you a few of his quotes. "We see in the fascia the framework of life, the dwelling place within which life sojourns. I know of no part of the body that equals the fascia. In every view we take of the fascia, a wonder appears. By its action we live, and by its failure we die. And finally, and perhaps most significantly, the soul of man seems to dwell in the fascia of the body." So if our soul is dwelling in our fascia, that suggests that fascia is reasonably significant. And it is extremely significant. And yet, despite Andrew Taylor's insights 150 years ago, fascia has until very recently been dismissed as mere packing material with very limited mechanical functions. Only in the last 20 years or so, recent research has confirmed Andrew Taylor Still's profound insights. He was a true visionary who could see, long before science could analyze fascia, Still could see how vitally important it was, how it was essentially maintaining life. Because it has a vast number of essential properties. Firstly, it maintains tensegrity. Tensegrity is a system of reciprocal tension through which any pull or imbalance is transmitted through the whole and affects the whole. So basically, fascia holds us together. We might think of the bones and muscles as holding us together, but actually fascia is what really holds us together and which enables the different parts of the body to connect with each other and to be interconnected. Fascia also transmits forces and injuries throughout the body. Whether you're a rabbit or a human being or any other living creature, you can see how the fascia is represented there being all interconnected, this network or web work of fascia connecting everything from the feet to the head. And so if you sprain your ankle, forces will be expressed from the ankle up through the body, up to your neck and throughout the whole fascial network. Similarly, if you twist your neck, it can have ramifications right down through your body. If you have scar tissue from an operation like a cesarean scar or appendix scar, that will have ramifications spreading out through that fascial network, often explaining why people get symptoms for no obvious reason. Fascia is also ubiquitous. In other words, it is present throughout the body. Every bone, every muscle, every blood vessel, every nerve, every organ is enveloped in fascia. And these are not just separate pieces of fascia, they are one continuous, unbroken network of fascia from the top of your head to the tips of your toes, extending throughout every body and into every little nook and cranny of your body, forming interconnected pockets of fascia which envelop every structure. Fascia forms the pericardium around your heart, the pleura around the lungs, the fascial sheath surrounding every organ, the synovial sheath around every tendon. And these are just examples. Essentially, it covers everything. And that includes the carotid sheath, that vital fascial sheath coming down through the neck, containing the carotid artery, jugular vein, and the vagus nerve. And clearly, we can see that any ramifications on the carotid sheath could have significant effects, affecting the blood supply to the brain, affecting the drainage of blood from the cranium, or affecting the vagus nerve with all its huge repercussions on the organs throughout the body. But fascia is not only enveloping every structure in the body, it also penetrates deep into the tissues. Every muscle is enveloped in fascia with a sheath around it called the epimysium. But muscle is composed of bundles of muscle fibers, and each bundle is wrapped in fascia, which is called perimysium. But each individual muscle cell has its own fascial sheath as well, the endomysium. As you can see in that picture, you can see the whole muscle enveloped in fascia, the individual muscle bundles, and each individual muscle cell on a microscopic level being enveloped in its own sheath of fascia. So if you're ever cutting up meat, you will see those various wider sheaths of fascia. Obviously, you don't see the individual sheaths around each cell, but that's an example of fascia that you might see in everyday life. And just as muscles are enveloped in fascia, the same applies to nerves. Not only is every nerve enveloped in a fascial sheath, the epineurium, but again, nerves are formed out of bundles of nerve fibers, and those bundles are enveloped in fascia, the perineurium. And every individual nerve fiber, microscopically thin, has its own individual fascial sheath, the endoneurium. But it goes even deeper than that, because fascia penetrates deep into the nucleus of cells, passing through cell membranes and through the nuclear membranes of each cell. There are molecules called integrins which enable that connection of the fascia from the extracellular environment to the intracellular environment, right into the nucleus, enabling continuous interconnection and communication, all the way from the fascia under the surface of the skin, deep down into the interior of every cell and nucleus within the body, connecting right through to the DNA. So when, as craniosacral therapists, we take up contact on the skin or any part of the body, and take our attention to the fascia, we can connect with that fascial network right down through into the internal structure of every cell in the body, influencing the DNA. And this is what Andrew Taylor Still could see long before science could see this. He recognized this very profound connection of the fascia. But even that is not the full story, because fascia actually provides the matrix within which every cell exists. It consists of a ground substance of mucopolysaccharides, a network of microscopic tubules through which flow the rivers of life. So you have fluids, nutrients, energy, electromagnetic radiation, or in craniosacral terms, the potency and the breath of life being transported through these microscopic tubules that form the fascia. So every communication with every cell in the body involves the fascia. Every substance or message that flows in or out of every cell involves the fascia, because it is an essential communication system throughout the body, acting as a liquid crystalline matrix. And as Mei Wan Ho says, liquid crystallinity provides the rapid, noiseless intercommunication that enables the organism to function as a coherent, coordinated whole. So it is fascia that is enabling that communication from one part of the body to the other, that enables us to function in everyday life. And that liquid crystalline matrix provides communication on many levels. It's It's a communication system completely independent of the nervous system. It carries high-speed messages through electrical charges that are transmitted through the fascia almost instantly, much faster than the nervous system. And it provides a global communication as opposed to the conventional nervous system creating more specific neurological stimuli. The fascial communication system provides this instant global communication so that the whole body knows what's happening everywhere else in the body instantly, and it's able to function as a cohesive, integrated unit. And fascia does also have its own nerve supply. It has a vast sensory nerve supply. We receive more sensation from our myofascial system than from our eyes, our tongue, our fingers. So a huge amount of sensation coming in from the myofascia. And particularly significantly, the fascia makes substantial and profound connections with the autonomic nervous system, particularly the sympathetic nervous system, the part of our nervous system that processes fight and flight reactions and stress responses. Every stress that we experience is immediately transmitted into the fascia, causing the fascia to contract. And that interaction between the sympathetic nervous system and the fascia means that every stress, every fight and flight reaction, every sympathetic stimulation, and particularly with severe trauma, is imprinted in the fascia in ways that affect us in very profound manner. So when we work with the fascia, particularly through fascial unwinding, we can therefore have a very significant effect, reducing sympathetic activity and hyperarousal, increasing vagal activity to produce calmness, tranquility, settling and balancing the autonomic nervous system. And of course, the autonomic nervous system regulates pretty much everything that's going on in our lives, and countering the many, many adverse physiological effects of excessive sympathetic stimulation. So this is hugely significant and is really emphasizes why the fascia is so important. And it means that the fascia is carrying emotional tensions. Emotional tensions are held within the tissues, and they are retained as tissue memory in the fascia. So fascia is carrying memories, both physical and emotional memories. So again, every injury, again, whether it's a sprained ankle, a twisted knee, a scar tissue from an operation, any kind of injury, that will be imprinted in the fascia and will stay in the fascia unless it is released through some process like fascial unwinding. And similarly, emotional tensions are held in the fascia and they will be imprinted in the fascia. And this is why when we work with fascial unwinding, not only can we release the physical tissues in a way that is much deeper than any other therapy, but also we release emotions and release emotional tensions, and memories and emotions will often arise as we work with the fascia in this way. And that has very profound effects, as I say, for everyday emotions that everybody holds on to. Every craniosacral treatment is really working with releasing the emotional tensions that we hold on to, but also particularly profound effects for trauma. So in understanding fascia, as I say, recent research has brought about a much greater degree of understanding. As Strabosand has said, fascia is an actively adapting organ with much greater functional importance than previously recognized, and the close links between fascia and autonomics may have far-reaching clinical implications. Now that's a scientist speaking, saying may have far-reaching clinical implications. As craniosacral therapists, we see those far-reaching clinical implications every day in practice, and they are huge implications. As Kovacs has said, in working with the fascia, we can view the body as a cybernetic system. Cybernetics means engaging with the automatic control systems and self-regulatory feedback mechanisms within the body. So when we work with fascial unwinding, we are truly engaging with these cybernetic systems in a way that manipulative therapies don't do, in a way that really engages with the nervous system and the emotional system in very profound ways. So in understanding fascia, we need to think of it not just as a connective tissue, but as the very nature of our being, the foundation of health. the river of life through which our existence is maintained and which enables us to function. As Andrew Taylor still said all those many years ago, our soul is in our fascia. So maintaining the health and free flow of our fascia is absolutely fundamental to life. Anybody want to ask any questions as yet? Anybody got any comments on what we've seen so far? There you go.
Yes, I'd had to find the unmute button. I'd just like to find out about the liquid in the tubules of the fascia. Is this cerebrospinal fluid?
No, it's not cerebrospinal fluid. I mean, many fluids throughout the body have a very similar structure, whether it's extracellular fluid, intracellular fluid, cerebrospinal fluid, lymph, all sorts of fluids have a similar type of makeup, but each with slight variations. Obviously, the cerebrospinal fluid is very pure and clear for enveloping the central nervous system. But the fluid within the fascia is essentially the similar fluid that flows through the body as extracellular fluid and intracellular fluid.
No, I was going to ask, what system does fascia come under? Does it come under lymphatic system? I know it's probably connected to everything, as you explained, but what system would you say it's closest to as body systems?
Well, of course, the whole concept of reducing things down to different systems is to some extent artificial.
Yeah.
It's inevitably, we have to do that to look at science and to define the body. And particularly from, centuries ago, as people started cutting up body and anatomists were looking at the body, they defined things in terms of skeletal systems and nervous systems and connective tissue systems and such like. But again, modern thinking realizes that that is artificial. I mean, the nervous system is really just a liquid crystalline matrix. It is a fluid medium within which all sorts of things are happening. Ultimately, everything in the body, whether it's the most solid bone or the most fluid liquid, is ultimately energy, is subatomic particles. And so that division of one system to another becomes artificial. So in a way, it's taking a step back to try and put it into a particular category, in which case one would categorize it as connective tissue. But that is to not really understand the full implications of fascia. And I think it's more productive to think of it not so much as a category of a particular type of tissue, but as this matrix within which life exists.
Thank you.
Okay, so I'm going to share my screen again and look at a video that is an endoscopic, a microscopic endoscopic film of the inside of the fascia. So it's a film inside the body showing fascia actually moving. It's by a French scientist called Jean-Claude Guimberteau, and it is a fascinating glimpse into the inside of the fascia.
These images were recorded of the living human fascia. This shape represents the kind of three-dimensional structure. As you can see deeply into the fascia, this is Strolling Under the Skin by Dr. Jean-Claude Guimberteau. When you see the behavior of the fascia under some pressure, you start to understand how it is moving. Watch as the fascia, tendrils of the fascia move. Imagine elasticity, surface tension, flow, and movement. But also, notice how the fibrils can move along another fibril. Its cross-linking is partly normal and partly abnormal. Now watch as you see the tendril move along another. Now think of a membrane spreading and splitting. Observe how it separates and how it can actually rejoin later on. The splitting is what we think of as the myofascial release. And here, the rendering of two tubules separating, for instance. See how The fascia is in constant motion, responding to our every movement, allowing every flexibility of the tissues, movement of muscles, movement of the body, joints, everything articulating and allowing this free movement. There is this conduction, this idea of the tubule as it conducts water. See this? As the water passes through a tubule of myofascia.
What did you think of that? Did you like that? It's rather fascinating to see the inside of the fascia like that way, isn't it? It's amazing material, and to see that it is so much more than just this connective tissue. So next, any other comments before we move on?
Just a question, and there's a lot of wows for the video, but the question was, how does fascia change during our lifespan?
Well, it depends, of course, on the life, but broadly speaking, it tends to become drier, it become more fibrous, it tends to become thicker, less mobile, and that can happen in response to injury, or it can happen just as time goes on in response to age. And of course, if we maintain the health of the fascia, then we maintain the fluidity and the elasticity and keep it much more vital. And as we're increasingly seeing from what we've been showing so far, it is the fascia that maintains life, and that is maintaining that flow of life through our bodies. And so when we maintain the health of the fascia, then it maintains this elasticity, this fluency, this fluidity, and enables the flow of life. If we don't maintain it, or if just in normal everyday life, it will gradually become less fluent, less elastic, and things won't flow so readily. So let's go back to the PowerPoint now. So most approaches to fascia in therapeutic practice remain predominantly mechanical, as shown in those pictures: massaging the fascia, manipulating the fascia, stretching the fascia, which is, of course, therapeutic. Myofascial release is a wonderful new therapy that's developed and is spreading around the world, and is having very positive effects, but it is predominantly a mechanical approach. What we do in fascial unwinding is something very different. In fascial unwinding, as taught at the College of Cranio-Sacral Therapy, we are not merely moving the body around in a mechanistic way. We are genuinely engaging with the self-regulatory cybernetic systems within the body's own feedback mechanisms, and its own choices as to where and how to move. We are truly acting as facilitators rather than as interveners. So with fascial unwinding, we're not manipulating the fascia. We are engaging with the sensory receptors within the fascia, mediating sensory motor responses, carrying sensory messages to the central nervous system and motor responses back from the central nervous system, in order to change the underlying neurological and emotional patterns within the body. So when we work with fascial unwinding, we're engaging with those various receptors like mechanoreceptors, Golgi tendon organs, Ruffini receptors, Pacini receptors, all of which are located within the fascia, around our joints and around the muscles. And these will be sending messages back to the central nervous system, and the central nervous system will be sending messages back. And this changes the responses in the body and the patterns imprinted in the body in a much more profound way than any manipulation will ever do. You won't necessarily have your patients flying through the air like in that picture, but fascial unwinding can often be like that. And it enables much more profound therapeutic responses because it's regulated by the body's own inherent wisdom rather than by any decisions made by the therapist. So again, I'm going to show you some videos. Now I want to show you some fascial unwinding in action. I'm going to start with a fascial unwinding of the, well, it starts as a fascial unwinding of the arm, but as you will see, fascial unwinding inevitably involves the whole body. It engages with the whole fascial network. And so when we work with the fascia, we are connecting not only with whatever part of the body we are holding, but with the rest of the body and, of course, the emotional side of that person as well. So again, I will go into a video. Lizette, have you got anything to say?
Yeah, just to answer Dina's question about if the fascia of professional dancers or expert movers is different from most persons' fascia. And I have to say, we've had a number of dancers that have come on the course, and they do unwind just probably, generally speaking, of course, it probably unwind a lot easier, a lot more flexibility. And for the, going back to Lisa's question, the health of fascia can be maintained through a sense of engaging with exercise or movement like stretching or yoga. So obviously the more that you're engaging in that, the more you're supporting that flexibility of the fascia.
Okay, thank you. None of the movements are coming from me. All I did was support the arm initially and then let it drop with gravity, and as it did, the engagement started. And once it engaged, it took on a life of its own, looked after itself. And so the body is taking this arm where it needs to go, and only the body itself can know where it needs to go, far more effectively than any practitioner could ever identify. You okay, Andy? So now in particular it's reaching a point of stillness. You can probably see the deeper level of engagement that's arisen recently. And so at this point we need to stay with that stillness. These are the key points in the fascial unwinding process. You okay, Andy?
It's definitely really something.
Do you feel okay to talk about it, about what you've been experiencing?
I was like energy being charged, and then I felt like I was spinning out. And then I just felt this heat building up, and it was just here, lots of heat. And then I felt really loved. It was just really nice. My whole leg felt just shooting electricity through its leg. I didn't expect to release so much.
And obviously it looks quite emotional and quite significant. Would you say overall, I mean, do you see it as a positive process?
Oh yeah, it was beautiful. It was really nice. It wasn't scary, but just very powerful, very quickly. Yeah, I've never experienced this before. Yeah, it's very... Yeah, really, really profound. Thank you so much.
Okay. What did you think of that?
Can only
Tina?
say, wow.
Anything else?
Sorry, I'm coming in late, and so I may have missed this. But like at the beginning of a session, how do you get the patient into a space where they can relax and unwind?
Well, this is part of the whole skill of being a therapist and being able to enable this. As I say, that video and the other videos I'm going to show you are just small fragments of videos which don't show the whole process. When you do the training, then of course we would go into that in much greater depth. But just as any therapist needs to create a suitable environment within which healing can happen, whether it's a physical therapist or a psychotherapist, and particularly as a craniosacral therapist, creating a safe space in which the person can let go is vital. And in terms of fascial unwinding, creating the space in which the body can move freely. It is a complex process. It's not something that can be answered in a few seconds, really. But it's very much a part of the process of fascial unwinding is to develop those skills. And if you try to do fascial unwinding without that understanding, then you tend to end up just doing some superficial physical manipulation rather than genuinely engaging with those more profound cybernetic processes. So yes, it's more than I can explain briefly now, but on our fascial unwinding courses, we do obviously go into that in much greater depth, and mostly by, of course, experiencing it live, whether on our live days on fascial unwinding or on a course, seeing how the process is reached and enabled and facilitated. But yes, it's obviously a vital part of it is creating the safe space and the environment within which that can happen. Thank you. Bibi.
Thomas, would you say that the fascial unwinding is also partially being affected by gravity?
Well, gravity is inevitably an influence on all of us at every moment in our lives. So it's something that needs to be taken into account in the process. And it's something which we can both use, but also which we have to distinguish between the fascial unwinding and the gravity. If you lift up an arm, if you let go of it, then obviously it would tend to just fall with gravity and drop to the ground or drop to the couch. So when you're going into a fascial unwinding session, you have to evaluate the gravity. You have to soften your contact until gravity starts to enable the limb to start to drop. But then the crucial part is to engage with the very subtle forces within the fascia, which begin to draw the body into different directions. And as you could see in that video, despite the effects of gravity that you would have expected to have pulled that arm straight down to the floor, that arm didn't fall down to the floor, because once you'd have engaged with the fascia, then the body takes on a life of its own and it follows those fascial patterns within the tissues. So yes, taking into account gravity is crucial, as I say, both as a way of helping the process to get started, but primarily being able to distinguish what is just mere gravity, just pulling the body down, and how you identify the fascial pulls and the engagement, which will enable the body to then work as if gravity was not there at all.
Yeah, that's what amazed me, because in general, like if we hold anything, we just fall down due to gravity, but in this instant it doesn't. So it makes me think like there is some quite strong force within the fascia in order to do that.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Thank you.
Great.
Yeah.
Thank you. Claire.
When you do fascial unwinding, do you just work with the arms?
Absolutely not. No, you can work with any part of the body. I'm going to show you a couple of more videos shortly, particularly working with the neck, but you can work with legs, you can work with abdominal organs, you can work with the whole body, you can work with the spine. So yes, on our complete training, we start with arms because they tend to be the easiest and lightest things to work with. And as you develop your skills, you can move on to other parts of the body. And so ultimately, you work with any part of the body. And as I said, whenever you're working with any part of the body, you're actually engaging with the whole body. So sometimes you might start unwinding an arm and the rest of the body decides to get involved of its own accord. Or you might start unwinding a sprained ankle and the rest of the body starts to get involved, or you can be working on an arm and the patient, as in fact Andy did in that video, she said she was feeling these electrical forces going down through her leg. And similarly, you can be unwinding an ankle and the patient will feel things happening in their neck and head, or things will be engaging throughout the whole system.
Thank you.
So there was a bit of background noise there. I'm not sure if I heard at the beginning where you're saying, why do we choose to work with the fascia rather than other tissues like nerves and such like that, right? So again, everything is connected. We're not ever really working with one tissue. And when we work with the fascia, we are working with the nervous system, both the sensory nervous system and the motor nervous system and the central nervous system and the autonomic nervous system. And when we're working with the fascia, we're working with the whole myofascial system. So we're working with muscles as well. Once again, everything is connected. Working with the fascia is in some ways a concept. It's recognizing that we are working beyond one particular system like muscles or nerves. You can, of course, just try to influence a nerve and that will have a limited effect. You can try to work on a muscle and that will have a limited effect. When we understand the fascia in terms of its recent research, we can see that all of these things are connected, that the fascia is the matrix within which all of these exist, and that when we are working with that fascial concept, we are allowing all the tissues to do whatever they need to do in their own wisdom, rather than the practitioner trying to do something to a nerve or a muscle or to anything else. And so fascial unwinding will arise in a session partly spontaneously, partly it may arise because a particular situation seems to that it might benefit from fascial unwinding. And so there'll be various reasons why we might incorporate it. But also, as craniosacral therapists with this awareness of fascial unwinding, it is something that we're working with pretty much all the time in every session, sometimes more evidently with widespread movements, other times more subtly with very subtle movements of the fascia. But again, primarily it comes back to the fact that all of these things are just one and the same, really. And when we're working with the fascia, we are working with everything. Okay, so I'd like to get back to show you a couple more videos. We'll have more time for questions in a moment. So I want to show you some videos of the neck. Two videos, one just an introduction to the video of the neck, and then a second one that will go into it a bit more. So again, Lizette, if you want to say something while I'm going back to the...
Yeah, and just going back to some of the questions, and Dina, your question as well, it's really is to be able to create a sense of safety and to hold that space. That fascial expression doesn't always come up and won't come up if the person that we're working with doesn't feel safe. And, you know, that sense of feeling contracted or within, it's something that the therapist can help to hold and make that container for them. So a couple of you actually wrote something similar in the chat about the role of the therapist holding that space, but just wanted to verbalize that as well.
Okay, thank you. So I think I showed this video last week, so many of you will have seen it already, but I think it's worth seeing again. And as you can see, my contact is very light. Heads obviously are heavy, gravity is pulling them down to the couch. And so in order for them to move, they need a little bit of support to keep them off the couch. But once you engage with the fascia, the head starts to move of its own accord. And none of those movements are instigated by me. None of them are instigated by the patient. All I'm doing is helping to keep the head off the couch so that it can move freely. And as you can see, my hand contact is very light, just allowing the body to move. And that will have repercussions down through the neck and through the whole fascial system, right down through the body. And the fascia will identify every little twist and turn that it needs to identify. As you see there, it can go into what look like quite extreme positions, but it'll always be comfortable because the body knows where it needs to go. And I'm never forcing the body to go anywhere. And as always, coming in very gently, removing the cushion.
You have a remarkably heavy head for such a small person. Obviously, obviously lots of brains in there.
So it looks as if I'm talking there. I've put the sound down because it's not particularly relevant to hear that at the moment. That's more of a kind of a training in how to do neck unwindings. But once again, you can see how the neck is moving of its own accord, and I'm just allowing it to happen. And my hands can come away from time to time. Just allow it to happen. It will choose the positions it needs to go into in order to connect with deeper levels, where it'll connect with emotional factors in different parts of the body. And as you can see, the whole body starts to respond to that. Once again, nothing is instigated by me, nothing that I'm doing other than allowing the body to go where it wants to go, and it finds the position in which it wants to respond. And again, that was not a conscious response from me or from the patient. The body just chose to rise up off the couch like that due to the fascial pull. So as you can see, any unwinding at any part of the body, the whole body is likely to get involved. So again, any comments before we move back to the
I just wanted to say that I saw Rebecca's hand up a few times in between. So I didn't know, Rebecca, if you still had any questions.
Yeah, sorry, Rebecca, if I'm not seeing you on the screen, but yes, do you want to ask something?
No, that's fine. It was a question about the process with Andy, and you said at the end of it that now it had gone into a still point, or there was stillness, and that was really important. And I just wondered whether you could just elaborate about that and what you might have been bringing in terms of your awareness to that point.
Absolutely, yes, that is a very crucial point. So thanks for raising it. When you see fascial unwinding, it's very easy to think that it's about movement, and obviously there is movement involved. But the most crucial points, the most significant points in fascial unwinding are always the moments of stillness, the points of stillness. The body moves of its own accord in order to discover those crucial points of stillness. And it's when it reaches those points, that's when the significant responses and releases are going to occur. So as the facilitator, as the practitioner, you're not taking the body anywhere, you're just giving it that space, and it will draw to wherever it wants to go. It will unwind in different directions. It will pull into areas in which it was injured or traumatized, or where there's some emotional holding. And when it gets there, it will hold into those points and it will go still. So as a practitioner, all you're doing is recognizing that that is a point of stillness, and knowing that that's where you need to stay. You can feel the quality of the system changing. You can feel the quality in the tissues changing. You can feel an increasing intensity. You can feel something building up as if it's going to release. And as a beginner, people often think when the body goes still that it's kind of stopped and they have to kind of start again, or they have to do something. And that's a mistake that people readily make. Recognizing those points of stillness, recognizing the quality in the stillness, and knowing that you just need to stay there, sometimes for several minutes, sometimes for a very long time, in order to enable the body to release at that deeper level. So yes, stillness is the most crucial thing, but that stillness is discovered by the body and then recognized by the therapist simply as something to stay with. Of course, in any craniosacral therapy, what you do with your attention, what you do with your consciousness is crucial. We talked about this a bit last week, I think. And so if the practitioner is not aware of what's happening, then things will not happen on such a deep level. If your consciousness is elsewhere, if your consciousness is not recognizing what's going on in the body, not finding those points or not recognizing those points of stillness, then the engagement won't be so deep. So the practitioner is not doing, but they are being, and they are being there with their consciousness And that is crucial to reaching those deeper levels of the unwinding process.
Okay, thank you. So just one further question on,
Yeah.
on that, which is that if as the therapist, you somehow interrupt that process, that holding of stillness that you get to, will it not integrate? Like, I hear that you might not go as deep, but will it not integrate? Like, is it that crucial, or?
It's not crucial in the sense that you would do any harm. I mean, if you miss the still point, then you miss the still point. You don't get the depth, but you miss it. If you're in a still point and you move on without letting the body do what it wants to do, then you lose that opportunity. But you're not going to do any harm. And obviously, ideally, you do want things to follow through. And if you're working with somebody who's in a very sensitive state, a very traumatized patient, you wouldn't want to take them into something and then leave them sort of connected with something that hadn't been completed. But again, you're not going to do any actual harm. You might just leave things incomplete. And even if you miss that opportunity, the body will just go round there again and want to go into it again. And so you'll get another opportunity for that to work through.
Great, thank you.
Yes, Olga.
Yes, hello, good evening. I wanted to ask, what is the feedback from the patients? I mean, is it what do they feel at the end of the session? Is something like the CST sessions? Do they feel relaxed? Are they aware of what has happened? I don't know. I just wanted to know what is the feedback from them.
Yeah.
I mean,
well, obviously you heard a bit of feedback from Andy after her session, which obviously looked quite emotional. And if you'd been seeing somebody like that in everyday life, you'd think something was wrong and they'd be upset. But she said it was really beautiful. I felt really loved. It was wonderful. And so that's very common, that even if people go through quite an emotional response, they will tend to experience it as a very beautiful release that brings them to a much calmer, more peaceful state. As you say, with most craniosacral therapy, people tend to feel relaxed and peaceful afterwards. With fascial unwinding, that's very much the case as well. Fascial unwinding is, in my view, just another aspect of craniosacral therapy. We're working with the same systems. And so, yes, it tends to be very relaxing, and it's particularly valuable for people who have great difficulty relaxing, people who are very tense, people who have never relaxed in their life, people who just don't know how to relax. Even with ordinary craniosacral sessions, sometimes they will find it not very easy, whereas fascial unwinding can often be very helpful in helping them to understand the whole process of relaxing much more, and just to get through to both the tissue levels and the emotional levels that will help them to relax. So yes, generally people will feel that things are released. They'll feel a weight lifted off their shoulders, off their bodies. They'll feel relaxed and loose and spacious. So yes, it's on the whole a very comfortable process.
So then it would be something adding to the CST, right? I mean, it will not be instead of, but it would be like a complement, like an extra, like a plus.
Well, as I say, I would see it as part of craniosacral therapy. I don't see them as two separate things, just a branch of craniosacral therapy. You can work with long tide, you can work with the middle tide, you can work with craniosacral rhythm, you can work with fascial unwinding, you can work with consciousness, you can do all sorts of different things. So I would just see them as all part of the same spectrum, and that sometimes you're working in stillness, sometimes things take off into unwinding, sometimes you're working in stillness and unwinding is happening on a very subtle level inside the body, sometimes the unwinding happens in a more physical way. Some sessions will be entirely in stillness, some sessions will be partly in stillness and partly in fascial unwinding. So it just depends on the patient's needs and the body's responses.
All right, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Colleen.
Yeah, so just observing in a couple of the videos anyway, you put your hand over the solar plexus area. What does that do?
Well, the solar plexus is, of course, a key area emotionally. It's where most people feel emotion and hold emotion, and where there is emotional tension and trauma, the solar plexus is very commonly going to be involved. Of course, other areas will also be involved, the heart center, the organs, many parts of the body, the whole body will be involved. But the solar plexus tends to be a key area because, of course, it is a sympathetic nerve plexus. which very much regulates emotions and controls emotions. So when you encounter emotional responses in the body, the solar plexus is often involved, and just engaging with the solar plexus with a very light contact can help the integration of the process, either a deeper release from the tensions that are held in the solar plexus or the sympathetic nerve activity that's going on in the plexus, or a settling of the solar plexus when things are coming up. So it's often a relevant area to engage with at the same time as the fascial unwinding, or also once the session is coming to an end, just going to the solar plexus to help things settle. So it's just a significant emotional area to work with. Okay, thank you, Sheila.
Yeah, it's particularly concerning with the neck, because the neck is such a sensitive area. In my experience, I found that a lot of the times people like to actually gain control of that. So as soon as the unwinding starts, they start moving, and I'm not sure whether it's it's a form of control for them, a protective mechanism, and I don't know sometimes how to get away from that, because I can feel this. Yep. It's not an unwinding of itself. Sure. It's them moving.
Yeah, again, a very crucial point in fascial unwinding. I know a lot of other trainings don't teach it because they don't really understand it. They don't, issues like what you just mentioned come up, and they don't know how to handle that, and therefore they give up on it because they don't find it effective. So one of the crucial practitioner skills you need as a therapist using fascial unwinding is to understand how to handle that. And we see that time and time again. People come on the craniosacral training, we teach them fascial unwinding. It happens quite easily on the course when we're guiding them, and then they go home and practice on real people, not craniosacral therapists, but people in the real world, and they find it doesn't happen, and they think, well, why it's not happening? And the reason it's not happening is that you again need to facilitate the suitable environment and potential for it to happen. So most people are relatively tense. They hold themselves quite tightly. They're not used to letting go. They're not used to letting somebody move an arm, let alone a neck. And so as soon as you start to lift up their body, they tend to help you, as you say. Or as soon as you start to move, they think, oh, well, I better go along with that, move it. So one of the essential skills you need as a therapist is to teach people, firstly, to relax and let go so that their body can move. And then secondly, people inevitably start to join in. You have to keep reminding them not to. And then they join in again and you remind them not to again. And you don't want to make it a battle, of course. You don't want to upset your patients, but it's a constant process that you have to be in constant dialogue with about. Some people will unwind very easily. It doesn't happen with everybody, but not everybody is going to interfere with the process. But for probably the majority of ordinary patients, you need to spend a lot of time teaching them to relax, teaching them to let go, teaching them not to get involved, so that their body can just do what it wants to do, rather than them trying to impose it and make things happen. So yes, very common problem. And that is something that comes up again and again, and it's something that we really work on those days, is teaching people how to communicate with their patients to enable the process to happen more spontaneously.
Thank you.
Okay, so let's go back to the PowerPoint again to finish things off. And again, we can come back to more questions. So again, Lizette, if there's anything to say.
Yeah, and I suppose that kind of also goes into, a lot of people have been asking in the chat, how do we instigate fascial unwinding, or how do we get it started? And as Thomas mentioned before, a lot of the time that will be spontaneous. So it will be something that might start happening while somebody's on the couch. Particularly, they might start moving their neck around a little bit, or having some twitching happening down through the limbs. But but also what we can do is what we learn on the course and what we learn on our trainings is how to initiate articulation, how to massage some of the tissue, the muscle, to help clients relax, and to help ourselves be able to just allow that process to take place if we feel like we're going to be meeting it in a particular way. So that is something that we, especially those of us who didn't come from bodywork backgrounds and maybe haven't been so comfortable in handling things like limbs, go into in a lot more depth.
Great, thank you. So let's look a little at the applications of fascial unwinding. And there are so many valuable applications. In craniosacral integration, we frequently see profound transformation of people's health through fascial unwinding, not just their health, their whole lives really. Whether it's for musculoskeletal injuries, chronic pain and restriction, emotional tension, trauma, or overall integration of the body and mind. Now, of course, patients tend to come with symptoms and they want to know whether you can help them with that. And we could list endless symptoms and conditions that could benefit from fascial unwinding. But of course, as craniosacral therapists, we know that it's not really about the symptoms and the conditions. It's a much more profound process than that. It's engaging with the body with its own inherent wisdom so that the body can heal the symptoms and the conditions. But as I say, people come with conditions, so we need to talk their language. We need to understand what conditions we can help, well, ultimately everything. But it's still useful to look at individual symptoms and conditions that that can particularly benefit from fascial unwinding. So first of all, musculoskeletal injuries are obvious examples. Frozen shoulders, very common, often very resistant to treatment, very difficult to work with. People go to manipulative therapies, they have lots of physiotherapy. Sometimes it helps, sometimes it doesn't. Often it's very painful trying to break down scar tissue and break down the tissues to enable greater freedom of movement. But frozen shoulders are often extremely painful. They often continue for many years. And fascial unwinding is hugely effective in enabling release in a very gentle way. You engage with the shoulder, engage with the arm. It will unwind very subtly at first. It's not painful because it will be a very, very small movement which will gradually release, and that will lead to an increasing flexibility and movement of the shoulder. And the other thing that's crucial is that, of course, we are working with the emotional levels as well. Most frozen shoulders have an emotional component as well. And that, again, is often not addressed in many therapies. And when we work, firstly, physically with the cybernetic systems, enabling the tissues to change and also enable the emotional patterns to change, frozen shoulders will respond very effectively to fascial unwinding. And obviously, you don't expect an arm to start floating around like the one in the video when somebody has a frozen shoulder. It'll be a microscopic movement initially, but gradually, as the tissues break down, and then the mobility will return. And again, I could give you countless examples of that. So many people come with frozen shoulders, and it's just wonderful to be able to help them with fascial unwinding. Most of them with a long history of having gone round from therapist to therapist and had loads of physiotherapy and such like. And then sprained ankles, mentioned before, something as simple as a sprained ankle can have far-reaching effects on somebody's overall health. Partly, the ankle may remain weak and not recover completely, and medically speaking it seems to have recovered, but the patient's never quite able to use it fully, not able to go for long walks or to run or play sport anymore, because there is trauma still in the tissues, the tissue memory. And a good example would be someone I saw. She was a medical secretary who'd had many different issues: back pain, neck pain, headaches, all sorts of health issues going on all over the body, and not getting any respite from any treatment that she was receiving. And she didn't come about her ankle at all. Her ankle wasn't a problem as far as she was concerned. But when I worked with her system, I traced this pattern of pulling down to the ankle and identified this pattern. And I said to her, have you ever injured your ankle? And she said, yes, I suppose I did. About 20 years ago, I think I sprained it, but it doesn't trouble me anymore. And so I did some unwinding on her ankle, and her whole body changed. Everything, the whole balance of the body changed, and her back pain and her neck pain were all able to dissolve away because the pattern in her ankle had been maintaining that imbalance. So the same will apply to back pain generally. And of course, back pain is very, very common. And Lisette, you've mentioned previously about how back pain, some research you mentioned in relation to fascial patterns. Do you want to say something about that again?
Yeah, there's a gorgeous fascial documentary called The Mysterious World Under the Skin. And there's a lot of people doing research on back pain specifically, a lot of physiotherapists looking at back pain and noticing its connection, that it's not actually a muscular tension, but it's the fascia, because the fascia is so highly innervated that especially since we have a large sheet of fascia on our lower back that's responding to that. But in this research that they've done, they've actually connected that lower back pain to stress as opposed to anything that was muscular.
Okay, thank you. So yes, also with scar tissue, as I've mentioned, many women having had cesareans experience a lot of pain in the pelvic area afterwards, and widespread pain, and one can often trace that down to scar tissue in the fascia. When you release the fascia, it can change things dramatically. And again, whether it's torticollis, neck pain, any musculoskeletal injuries anywhere in the body, sports injuries and such like, they can be hugely helped by fascial unwinding. And then with chronic pain and restriction generally, whether it's in the neck, the limbs, abdominal pain, pelvic pain, pains that don't seem to have any obvious cause, pains which are not responding to other therapies, you very often find the solution in the fascial unwinding, whether you're working with the organs and the abdomen or the heart or whatever part of the body. And particularly in also conditions, chronic autoimmune conditions like fibromyalgia and lupus, or also in chronic fatigue. Again, that connection of firstly working on this very profound level, working with the cybernetic systems, but also combining physical and emotional simultaneously, releasing underlying patterns at levels that people just didn't even realize existed, changes these patterns at a much deeper level. And then emotional tension generally, as we've talked about already, we all hold emotional tension in our bodies to a greater or lesser degree. Every craniosacral session is releasing tension and trauma and emotional tension. And whether it's grief, anger, sadness, whatever it might be, when we engage with the emotions and release fascial unwinding, then emotional patterns change. And sometimes in obvious ways where people will have a memory of something, sometimes they'll feel emotional and a tear will trickle out or two, like with Andy, or they sometimes have a more dramatic emotional response. But sometimes also there won't be any obvious emotional response, but they'll just feel completely different afterwards. They'll say, they'll come back the next week and say, life's just been completely different. I'm not arguing with my partner anymore. I've just felt happy the whole time. I just feel calm. I just feel things have changed in my life so much. And again, to give you an example, I saw a woman a few years ago who had patterns that were very symptomatic of a heart condition. She had pain in her chest, in the left side of her chest, there was pain going down the left arm to the little finger. And it was sort of feeling tight and tense and contracting. And she'd obviously been to doctors and they immediately suspected a heart condition. They did lots of tests, couldn't trace anything, no sign of a heart pathology. They did more tests, they still couldn't find anything. The symptoms persisted. She went back to other doctors, to other specialists. Again, nobody could find anything. The doctors were convinced there must be a heart pathology because of her symptoms, and yet they couldn't find anything. So by the time I saw her, it was about 3 years later, she still had these symptoms, but nobody could find any cause for them. As I engaged with her system, I was drawn to her pericardium, which is, of course, the fascial sheath around her heart. And it felt very tight and contracted there. And as I worked on that area and allowed the pericardium to unwind, a tear started to trickle down from her eye. I asked her what was happening, and she told me, which she hadn't told me previously, that 3 years previously her husband had died, but because she had small children, she'd wanted to be strong for them. She'd, done everything she could to look after them and not show any sadness or grief. And ever since that moment, she had, of course, been holding on to this grief. She'd never expressed it to anybody. So it was held in her heart and in her pericardium in particular. And this is a very typical example of what one finds, that, apparent physical pathologies that are actually emotional patterns, patterns that appear in every way to be a heart condition, and in a way they are a heart condition, but they are emotion held in the heart, not a pathology held in the heart. So again, once that was released, once she'd expressed her sadness, talked about what happened a bit, then the symptoms disappeared. And again, one can work with very profound emotional patterns. One can work with childhood patterning where, children who've gone through very difficult childhoods and have a lot of trauma and suppression and repression and anger and such like, can be hugely powerful in releasing those patterns. And as I've said, with trauma, fascial unwinding could be a very powerful resource in working with trauma. As we've already said, you need to, of course, have many trauma skills to handle traumatized patients, but fascial unwinding can be a hugely valuable skill in releasing and resolving those deeply held trauma patterns, resetting the conditioning that is set within the amygdala and the hippocampus, releasing the day-to-day accumulation of trauma, rebalancing the autonomic nervous system, changing the underlying state, both physical and emotional, restoring tranquility, transforming life on profound levels, and bringing overall integration of the body and mind. Now, I know many of you were here last week, and we did look at trauma last week, but trauma is so fundamental. I think it's worth mentioning again, just briefly to go through, particularly for those of you who weren't here at last week's session. Trauma, as I've said, is fundamental to life, it's fundamental to health, it's fundamental to enabling healing. Everyone is affected by trauma to a greater or lesser extent, and it's not just a matter of severe traumatic events, but the accumulated trauma that we all pick up in day-to-day life from all the different things that happen to us in our lives. And craniosacral integration, and particularly fascial unwinding, can be exceptional in the profound resolution of trauma at the deepest level. Firstly, we need to understand that trauma is not just something that happened to you, something you need to forget about or get over. It is a physiological process involving the amygdala and the hippocampus, leading to physiological overwhelm. And it's an overwhelm in which fight and flight or freeze patterns become deeply entrenched in the system, affecting everything about us, our whole perception of life, our response to our environment, our reactions and our behavior. So in this upper picture, you can see the triune brain, in other words, the three-part brain. The red part is the reptilian brain, which is concerned with survival instincts. The limbic part system is the green part, the mammalian brain, processing emotional responses. And the purple part is the neocortex, the rational brain that humans have. And the amygdala and the hippocampus are structures within the limbic system. Amygdala is Greek for almond, and these are two almond-shaped structures, and they are the alarm systems for our bodies. When you have an alarm in your house, a fire alarm, it goes off to tell you that there's a fire, you need to run for your life, and it fires off your sympathetic nervous system to get out of the house as quickly as possible. Whenever you undergo trauma, your amygdalas stimulate your sympathetic nervous system, send you into fight and flight. But in trauma, the amygdala has been overwhelmed, and they're firing the whole time, so that the traumatized patient's system is in sympathetic fight and flight the whole time, even when there's no trauma there. And this is like having the fire alarm in your house going off the whole time, but you can't switch it off, and you can't tell yourself there's nothing to worry about. Your amygdalas are telling you there is trauma, you need to go into fight and flight, you need to run for your life, and there's nothing you can do about it. The hippocampus is Greek for seahorse, because they're sort of seahorse shaped, and the hippocampus records memories and keeps them in order so that you can tell what's happening now and what's happened in the past and when it happened. But again, in trauma, the hippocampus has been overwhelmed and it's lost track of what's happening when. And it's telling you that traumas that happened years ago are happening right now. And again, sending you into fight and flight in a way that you can't control at all, because it feels to the traumatized patient as if that trauma is happening to them right now and they are overwhelmed by it. So trauma determines what's happening in that traumatized person's life. It determines their whole conditioning, their response to life, their very nature. They may appear to have recovered from the trauma, or they've got over it in some way. So the war veteran may have survived the war, come back to civilian life, built up a business, created a family, children, appears on the surface to be fine. But something as simple as a car backfiring can send him diving for cover and back into his sense of being back in the war. And a firework display would be absolute hell for him. He would feel like he was being constantly bombed and shot at and traumatized. So he has no control over that. And the same with any traumatized person, whatever the form of trauma, their system is telling them that they need to be in fight and flight, even when there's nothing happening and there's nothing they can do about that. So trauma needs healing at a very profound level, not just physical therapy, not just psychotherapy, but the release of shock and trauma at a molecular level, a subatomic level, a quantum level, and reintegration of the whole person. Trauma is at the root of almost all ill health, whether it's from birth, injury, difficult childhood, parents, school, bullying, relationships, broken relationships, rape, childhood abuse, sexual abuse, war, torture, post-traumatic stress disorder, or the accumulation of all the many stresses of everyday life in our bodies. Fascial unwinding can be instrumental in resolving those deeply embedded traumas. And every craniosacral session is about releasing trauma from the system, and fascial unwinding can be particularly crucial in that. Fascial unwinding is transformative. It's not just about relieving symptoms of a sprained ankle or some scar tissue. It is about transforming the overall state of health and well-being at the deepest level, thereby resolving a multitude of health issues. It's very often effective when nothing else has worked, even other aspects of craniosacral therapy, and it can be the key factor where other therapies have not been effective. Fascia is the matrix within which life exists. When we integrate the fascia, we are enabling the flow of life throughout the body, enhancing the inherent healing potential for integration of body and mind. We are establishing the underlying matrix for health and well-being, creating the foundation for health. Unfortunately, fascial unwinding is not widely taught or understood, apart from through the College of Cranio-Sacral Therapy. There are others who use it. There are many people working with fascia in different ways, but not with fascial unwinding. There are people who do things that they call fascial unwinding, but which is not the same as what we do here. And as I say, even most craniosacral trainings are not teaching fascial unwinding. Fascial unwinding is an integral part of the professional training at the College of Cranio-Sacral Therapy, and a very, very valuable resource for any craniosacral therapist. So, just to finish off, I'd like to mention that many people often ask, can you work with animals? And so I'd just like to show you how to unwind a cheetah in 5 easy steps. First of all, find your cheetah. Secondly, take up contact. Thirdly, engage. Follow as the system gradually settles and releases until it comes to a relaxed, satisfactory resolution. So if you ever find a cheetah you want to involve, a cheetah that you want to fascially unwind, there you go. You can, of course, work with other animals, lion cubs. Our cats at home love it. I've got some other videos of unwinding my cats, which are beautiful to watch, but we haven't got time for today. I think that those cubs look pretty unwound by now, don't they? Okay, so just finally, to let you know about the courses we're running. You may already know about them. You may have looked at the website, but we run, well, first of all, Fascial Unwinding is an integral part of our craniosacral training. So if you do, whether our 1-year training or our 2-year training, you will learn Fascial Unwinding. You will learn Fascial Unwinding in great depth. But we also run these separate courses, partly for people who haven't learned Fascial Unwinding from other craniosacral college, or therapists from other therapies who haven't done Fascial Unwinding, and also because many of our graduates like to come back to do more Fascial Unwinding. So each year in March, we do the first day, which is about arms and legs. Each year in May, we do part 2, which is about neck and trunk. And each year we do a 4-day, 2-weekend online course on Fascial Unwinding. Of course, it's great to do Fascial Unwinding live and to really experience it and to be giving each other unwindings. You might wonder how it could possibly be taught online, but we've managed to find a way of doing that very effectively. But of course, doing it live is also even better. So for this year, part 1 will be happening in just under 4 weeks' time on Sunday, the 13th of March. Open to any therapist. You don't have to be a craniosacral therapist, but you don't have to have done any Fascial Unwinding previously. Part 2 follows on from that on Sunday, the 15th of May, dealing with the neck and trunk. And we will do the online course at some point this year, but we haven't set the dates for that yet. And again, those of you who were here before will have seen our college, but I'll just run through for those who weren't here, where we hold our courses. We have some beautiful premises, this one in Hampstead and this one in Bayswater. That's Michael doing a Tai Chi course before the start of the day. Tai Chi goes wonderfully well with Fascial Unwinding. It's great as a therapist. If you do Tai Chi and learn Tai Chi, it can really help you to work more fluently in your Fascial Unwinding. And that's not about Fascial Unwinding, but again, just shows you the wonderful atmosphere we have at our college and the wonderful tutors we have. Okay. So I'm finished for today, apart from any more questions you want to ask. So, yes, somebody, E. Rahman, is asking at what point you can provide Fascial Unwinding to your patients. So obviously it depends a bit on your previous experience. If you're a craniosacral therapist already and you come and do our Fascial Unwinding courses, you can just incorporate that into your craniosacral practice straight away. If, as I say, you do our craniosacral training, then you would be learning Fascial Unwinding as a part of your training and you'd be able to use it. If you're a therapist on some other physical therapist, or say a physiotherapist or a massage therapist, then again, if you do our live days, then you will be able to apply it in practice. And similarly, if you do our online course, you would be able to incorporate it into your practice if you're already a professional therapist. If you're not a professional therapist of any kind, then these Fascial Unwinding days are not a complete training as a therapist. They are just days that you can add on to your professional skills. So you don't want to think that you do one day of Fascial Unwinding and then you can be a professional therapist. You'll have something that you can practice on friends. It's something that's perfectly safe to use, and it will, of course, inspire you to want to learn more and develop more skills. So yes, depending on your background, you can use it either straight away or whenever you have the necessary skills to do so. Okay. Anything else?
Phoebe.
Hi. So I'm interested doing the Fascial Unwinding, but I saw that you only got the online for the extremities and the neck and the trunk. And I was wondering, how do you deliver the online for other areas such as the organs, the heart, etc.?
Well, it's not actually the case that the online course only deals with those things. The online course does work very comprehensively with the viscera as well, and it is working with the whole body. Those live days, the first one, it is called arms and legs, and they are the main feature, particularly for people who are first beginning with fascial unwinding. That's a good starting point. But as we've already seen, whenever you work with arms and legs, the rest of the body starts to get involved, and you're inevitably influencing the rest of the body. The second day is about the neck and the trunk really means the rest of the body. Everything else includes the organs, the viscera, the spine, and so on. So even though within those 2 days we are covering the whole body, obviously in 2 days you can't expect to get a total training, but you are covering the whole body. And the online course is a 4-day course, so it covers a bit more than those 2 days. And again, it does cover working with the viscera and such like.
So for myself,
yes.
Myself as a therapist, I need to be able to feel it, to be able to learn. So would you say that the online learning would kind of limit the ability to learn? Or would you have tips and things to overcome that?
I mean, I think ideally it is good to learn it in person, where you can actually work on people and practice on each other and such like, and really feel the effect. So for anybody who can get to the live days, I think that's definitely the best option as a starting point. We developed the online course during lockdown because obviously it was not possible to do live courses for a while. And people were asking for it, and it is very effective. But I would still say that if you can get to the live days, they're definitely the best option.
Yeah.
So if you can get to the live days, particularly the first one, then that would be the best way to really get to know fascial unwinding. And then the online one, you know, it does teach you fascial unwinding, and particularly for those who live in a different country or for whatever reason are unable to get to the live days, it does give you, a training in unwinding. But and it's also good following on from the live days. It teaches you more things than you learn on the live days. So yes, they're both good, but if you can get to the live ones, then that would definitely be the best option.
So for the online session, do we need to have a volunteer for us to work with at home?
For the online sessions, yes, we do recommend having a volunteer. It's not absolutely essential. Some people don't manage to get a volunteer, and you can still do the course, but it is preferable for parts of the course. You don't need to have a volunteer there all the time for all 4 days, or for the whole of all 4 days, just for certain parts of it for the practical sessions. But it is helpful to have a volunteer. Anything else?
I have a question.
Yeah.
Beatrice. So now, as you're saying about full training which you're doing, about that 1 year, I have, as it is, since I'm in India, it's quite difficult for me to come over. So my question is it necessary to go step by step from the first to the last one? Or is it like they say, okay, now I'm for whatever 2 months in Germany, or can come over to England, and then is it possible to say, okay, now this time I could make this 2 courses, and then the following year I make another 2 courses, and is that possible, such type, or do I have to go step by step?
That's perfectly possible. Yeah. Obviously, the majority of people do tend to go through the training from start to finish in 1 year or 2 years, but some people just find they want to take longer and they take a break, or sometimes people for one reason or another aren't able to, or as you say, someone like yourself who lives in another country. So yes, you can come over and do a couple of the stages, and then come back a year later to do the next 2 stages and so on. So yeah, that would be fine. So email us at the college and we can give you more details about how that would work.
Okay. Yeah, okay, fine. Thank you. I will try to join for your facial unwinding course. Let's see, I will try to do it. I'm already a therapist, I'm a Heilpraktiker, and I'm already started learning on Cranio-Sacral Therapy. And so you think I will be able to do with patients later on?
Yeah,
after this
absolutely.
online course?
Yeah.
Okay, fine. Thank you.
Okay. Okay. Any other questions? So it looks as if it's coming to be time to finish. I think we've gone, oh, it's just about finishing time on time.
Can I just ask
yes.
one last question?
Yep, Claire.
Hi there. If for any reason we have any more issues with the pandemic in the next couple of years, is it possible to continue with the craniosacral training online?
Yep.
It is.
Absolutely, yes. Obviously, we had the the initial lockdown over the last couple of years. There've been various issues around that. We've managed to maintain our courses, and so yes, whatever happens, we will adapt to cope with it. And I think the way things are going, governments are very concerned to keep things moving now. So I don't think there ever will be a lockdown as there was a couple of years ago. But anyway, whatever happens, we will provide resources online and provide live courses whenever. And if things need to be deferred for any reason, they will just be deferred until it becomes possible. But we'll certainly find a way.
Thank you.
Okay, last chance. Anyone else? Okay, well, I'd like to thank Lisette for managing the course so well and for your contributions. Thank you, Lisette.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
And thanks to all of you for coming. It's been lovely to be with you this evening, and I hope to see you all at some point. Audrey, you want to ask another question, or you just okay? Just applauding. I see. That was an applause hand. Okay, so yes, good luck with whatever you're doing, and I hope to see you on one of our courses. And any information you need, just contact the college, email us, and look forward to seeing you all again at some point. Thank you, and see you again. Hope you enjoyed it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone.
Wonderful.
Thank you.